Hi, I'm Sid. I'm the CEO of GitLab, and I'm joined today by Zach Holman. Zach, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Zach Holman. I'm an advisor at GitLab and also a CEO and founder of During.
Thanks for joining us, Zach. We're going to discuss today the complete DevOps vision that GitLab outlined when we raised our C round. And it's a vision to combine both development and operations in a single application. Zach, you've had a chance to review it. What are your thoughts? What do you like about it? What don't you like about it?
Yeah, I mean, just from like a really high level perspective on everything, I'm just excited that there's like more connections between all these different services and stuff, and especially like the DevTools industry and marketplace. I mean, we were talking a little bit earlier about just how amazing it's been to go from like the main focus of DevOps or even just development tools in general, like 10 years ago was just version control. And now we just have so many different services and tools available to us. And it's just been really exciting to sort of see where this is coming together and, kind of most importantly, where this is going to be in like another 5 years or so. I'm still pretty excited about, the developer and where they are in the industry. It's a pretty fun time, I think.
Yeah, I think that what we're seeing is that there's so much different tools you can use as a developer. It's from performance testing to review apps to all these different tools that make your life better. But a lot of organizations are struggling to kind of set that all up and to give that. And especially if you're starting out as an individual, kind of hard to get started. A couple of months ago, I was at a Bill Skills event, and like one of the students came to me and said, "I'm sorry, I have a Windows laptop because it was so hard to set up the tools. Like that doesn't make sense to me. It's 2017. You should be able to, if you have a working computer, you should be able to develop something."
Yeah, and that's what kills me. It's like it's so. I hear a lot that there's a service for that, or there's a something you can sign up for and do it, but like. Cool, that's not the problem. Like the real problem is trying to get all this stuff together to work together without having to drop like 6 engineers' time for like 3 weeks trying to integrate it all. And that's kind of the trick. Like it's just making all this tech and open source and all these tools come together in a way that isn't going to make you pull your hair out type of deal.
Yep. Yeah, it's already, the future is already here. It's not evenly distributed. And another thing was when we started this company and investors looked at us like the dev tool space. Are you serious? Everything is already available for free. And only now I think of a good response to that. Yes, it's already out there for free. That's great. We're going to leverage that and we're going to integrate all those free things into a good package. And we've done it with for example, now Prometheus, like great monitoring technology, but kind of not super easy to get started with. Same for Kubernetes, awesome tech, but takes you a week to get started with. But with Auto DevOps, you just push your code, and GitLab figures out how to deploy it. It's much more that paradigm. One thing I wonder is whether we're biting off too much. Like we now have articulated the ambition to do not just kind of performance metrics with Prometheus, but also do logging, do distributed tracing. Isn't that what do you think of that risk of trying to do too much?
Yeah, I think it's like definitely a real possibility. I mean, obviously, there's just like you start getting into if you look at like an entire company's development processes, you start running into the problem of this is potentially too much for one person to really tackle in their head. Like they can say, oh yeah, the person in charge of our infrastructure are going to deal with like these 3 or 4 things, and the developers are going to deal with these things, the designers on these things, and that's all cool. But like you're just sort of spreading yourself even thinner and thinner. I think that's, this is not something that's been new in our industry for a long time. Like we've always had pretty cool, groundbreaking tools and stuff. But like the real question is how do you kind of package those tools up to where more people can find those tools accessible, more people can at least talk about them or manage the people working on them, without making it all too, specific to specific use cases and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it's like potentially, a hard thing, at least to build an ecosystem where, not everybody will care the same about, monitoring as some other organizations and stuff like that. So, the real challenge is how do you talk about it in a way to where people can sort of grok it and figure out how to use it for their own problems and stuff like that.
Yep. Yeah. Our assumption is like, we just offer it. We offer it by default, but we're not going to have you slow you down. Like if you don't want to use monitoring, that's fine. You just ignore it. You ignore the graphs that are on your merge request. Don't do anything with them. They're just there if you want them. And what surprises me is that when you start developing, it's like it's opening one Pandora's box after another. Like first, okay, you learn HTML, and okay, then you learn CSS. Oh, now you have to learn programming, and it just keeps going. Like then there's version control, then there's monitoring, then there's error logging, then there's tracing. Like the concepts keep hitting you, and if you think about the journey of an application from first making it to like something that is heavily used in production, you need to, every serious application in production probably has all these things. It's just that they get added over time. And it's the question is, do we want to start out of the box with having all these tools set up where you can customize them later, or should you only add them over time? And for us, technically, it's just easier to just give everyone everything with auto DevOps, and then if you don't want to use it, fine, it's there, but it's maybe consuming some CPU power, but that's about it.
Yeah. I think that's like, if you look at a lot of the great ecosystems and stuff of the past, like Adobe is a good example of, like Creative Suite and stuff. Like you're right, where, yeah, I joined for Photoshop, but if I want to work in this sort of area, yeah, it's nice to have something else in the ecosystem where you can, as your skills and your team skills expand, you can say, oh yeah, now we can use Illustrator, now we can use these other things. They all sort of integrate well with each other. And that's like kind of the nice benefit of having that type of ecosystem approach, is just having at least some solution there, and then sort of building upon it as you all, as both the provider grows up and matures, but also as your development team matures and gets better as well.
Yep, it's funny that you mentioned ecosystem. Our competitors are having another approach where at GitLab we kind of tend to get open source tools and integrate them. GitHub is going for more of like a SaaS marketplace where you can have additional applications. And Atlassian is going for a full suite of applications, but they're not a single application. They're just applications that tend to work well together, and you kind of work with a reseller to customize the integration. How do you, that's my view of the market. How do you view the market?
That's a pretty good breakdown. I think, at the end of the day, like they're probably all correct. And there's a lot of people that are going to want different approaches. The real question is like, how does the market actually, what percentages between the three companies and different approaches end up being, the biggest slice of the pie or something like that. But I mean, it's that's part of the interesting part about tech, is that you can sort of pick and choose to see, what works for me. Do you want more of a all-in-one box situation? Do you want tighter integration between all of those? Do you want more specialized approaches and say, I just want like the best tools. They don't really need to work together or something like that. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. And like, even more than that, my opinion of like what is best sometimes changes over time, especially depending on what company I'm working with, or how big my team is, or how much money my team has. And I think that's kind of an interesting thing too, is to sort of recognize that everyone's needs sometimes change over time. And it's always worth kind of considering, reevaluating your own thoughts to see what makes the most sense given the problems you're facing today.
Yep. I think that's a very interesting conversation. And it's kind of best of breed versus all in one. And two things we're now saying to customers, like, you can do GitLab with best of breed. If you want to use GitLab with Slack or with Jenkins or with Jira, we'll make sure that that's an awesome integration. And the second thing is, people kind of assume that if you have all in one, you're not going to have best of breed. And I'm not sure if you noticed, but Forrester just came out and selected GitLab CI as the #1 in strategy and in product, like the by far the leader in the space. And that was almost surprising to us, because we never thought we'd do better than all the pure play CI players. But with the help of the community, we can. And I wonder whether we can pull that off for other parts, like the monitoring, where we can have a better monitoring technology based on Prometheus and the contributions of the community than anything else out there.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like, at the end of the day, GitLab's always had really great hooks into whatever the hell you want to use. Like if your team is dead set on using Jira, there's probably a good reason, politically, internally, or whatever the case is. And like, cool, you just sort of add it, and like everyone's happier off. Like, it's not that big of a deal. And that's like, at the end of the day, I mean, computer programmers have not shied away from having discussions about what is the best at particular tools, sets, and stuff like that. So, you're not going to win any argument ever, even if you do have the best tool and stuff like that. So really, like, you're banking on, like, we want a really great ecosystem and one that's extendable. People can kind of make their own choices and stuff like that.
Yep. Yeah, we're working on a page that says GitLab is better Jira integration than Atlassian itself. That's our goal. We're not there yet, but we don't want. It's also very hard if you come into an account, a new customer, like coming in and say, "Oh, you got to replace these 5 tools." Like, that's you just complicated the acquisition. And if you're in there and you say, "Look, hey, we can now." Let's have a conversation now that you're using GitLab. Like, what's stopping you from switching out these other products for GitLab, and what and help there. But coming in and saying, "Oh, throw everything away and start using GitLab," that it makes it a lot hard. It hinders your adoption instead of helping it.
Yeah, and just kind of like, something you kind of mentioned, getting away from all the sort of business side of things. Like, I think there is something to say, especially when we're talking about ecosystems, about like a right way of thinking about things. Not to say that like tools or something are wrong, but like, if there is an area of your development team that you just don't understand or don't know about, and it can be really hard to sort of jump into a whole new thing about like, oh yeah, this is the best way to monitor your stack or something like that. And if you've never really spent a lot of time doing that, it can be pretty daunting and stuff. And like, the benefit of having, the ecosystem approach is that people are like, oh, cool. Well, this is at least, GitLab's providing this. That may be a good idea. And then you sort of level up, your company in terms of like skill sets and stuff like that. And that's kind of just I just like seeing that in any industry, is to sort of help people get to the right answer if they don't have any answer at all for that sort of stuff.
Yep. No, I totally agree. And for example, historically, we got into a lot of accounts for our source code management and code review. But now we're seeing that people are using GitLab for CI and CD. They're using, for example, GitHub Enterprise for source code, but they're using GitLab for the CI and CD part. We want to make that easier. So we're working on a CI CD only functionality. When you set up a new project, you say, "Look, I'm only interested in the CI CD. I don't need the issues or the version control. I just want to use it for this." And we want to stimulate that. It's another way to get a foot in the door. And I think you said something else, like, if you're starting with something, you want a simple experience. And I think the JavaScript ecosystem is very interesting. I like Ruby on Rails was my first framework. I thought that would work too in the JavaScript world. So I was very big on Ember. I think Yehuda Katz is, I think, one of the most prolific developers of our generation. And I thought he was on the money. I thought like everyone should use Ember. And I just talked to a startup that switched from Ember to React. And I really like talk with them to see like, how can this be? And there's a couple of things, but one of the things is people want to start simple. Like they don't want to have to embrace the whole thing. They want to start with a simple thing. Another thing is like, it's because Ember started before all kinds of things were in like ECMAScript 6. Now that those functions are there, they're kind of behind the curve. Their object model isn't as neat, etc. So that was interesting. And also talking with the Meteor people, they also kind of made a Ruby on Rails, but like next gen with NoSQL and everything, and then a great out of the box experience. And they were really hurt when React came along and they had to swap out. I think it was something with a B browser or something like that. Bower, no, that's a packaging system. Anyway, they had some template rendering thing, and they needed to swap it out for React, and it kind of really upset them. So it's like you need to be best in class in everything you do. Otherwise, people will start swapping you out. And that was eye-opening. Like there's on a bleeding edge, there's people don't accept anything less than being the best.
Yeah, it's kind of like a first mover disadvantage when you're too quickly. If you make the right bets, then you win it all. It's end up losing to like the standards that the community end up putting out afterwards. Like you're kind of stuck in that hole and you're like, well, how do I flip this up and change it up and stuff? But the JavaScript thing is kind of an interesting example too. Like I'm the same way. I got Ruby on Rails is like my bread and butter for more than a decade or something like that, and like I still use it in the back end, but like I was sort of like fish out of the water last year or so trying to figure out like, okay, I've been using JavaScript for like 15-20 years, but I haven't used any of like the new, you could spend hours just talking about all the individual parts of the ecosystem. And, it's one of those things where like, especially if you're new or you don't really deal with that aspect of the industry before, you don't really want the best. You just sort of want good guidelines to go forward. And at least for me, like I, shout out to like Create React app, the Facebook app. They just sort of, I use that to sort of start with like a framework. And then, it's kind of the opposite of what Microsoft got blasted for ages ago. Like instead of extend and extinguish, like you can build on this good framework and ecosystem and actually extend it. And that's kind of the best of all worlds and stuff. So I don't know. I find all this stuff really interesting. Like how do you move into like a good, proper understanding of like the standards of whatever practice you're looking at. And it's a really tricky thing. And like, sometimes you can't even Google for that sort of stuff. Like, from a high level, how do I get this organization of 150 developers to do X, Y, and Z? Like, not a lot of people have really talked about that sort of stuff. So I think it goes for like the importance of having a good foundation to start building on and specializing, depending entirely on like how your problems you're actually facing on a day-to-day basis map to those solutions.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's what we're seeing too. And it's GitLab is kind of it kind of guides you towards like a happy path of doing development and operations, but there's more to it. It's not just the tools. It's also how you do agile, how you schedule your work, how you collaborate. And that all has to change. And we're looking more and more into like organization transformation as part of what we offer. Like it's not just a new tool. It's also about how to change your organization to adopt it. And I think companies like Rally and Pivotal have done a much better job than us in helping organizations work in a better way. And we're going to do a positioning exercise at GitLab to see how we want to kind of message that, but I think we also probably need like extensive professional services and probably also the developer component of that, like meetups and things like that to help people adopt it. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's at the end of the day, like tools are cool. The real tough part in any industry, much less tech, is like, how do you change human behavior? Because like I've talked to a lot of customers and clients and just different people in the industry, and you can tell them step by step and say, hey, what you're doing is hurting your employees, it's hurting your developers, your development pace, all these sorts of things, and you'll get yeses for each of them. And then if you say, well, why don't you think of this whole bigger change in your organization to fix this? And they're just like, oh, I wouldn't want to do that. That's too big of a change or something like that. And it's like, I don't know, it's as logical as programmers and everybody else in our industry like to think themselves. It's the human side that's like the really tricky part, is trying to convince people that these changes are A, like worth pursuing, and B, will actually work for you. And I think that's like the real tricky part. And like the companies that can do that really well, like Pivotal and Rally and Co, like, it's really powerful, because you are like changing minds and stuff and all those other, cliche phrases and stuff like that. But like, it's a big deal to try and, convince people to say, hey, yeah, this will actually save you a lot of time. This will save you a lot of money. Actually think about making these changes in your organization.
Yep. Yeah, I try to view it from the perspective of someone like purchasing GitLab, let's say in an IT or engineering manager. Like, it kind of feels fake. You say, hey, please buy GitLab, and you get all these best practices. Oh no, yeah, the hardest part of it is transforming your organization. Yeah, we're not helping with that. There's the tool, now they have the tool to do it, but you're responsible for doing the rest. Like, you're not actually helping them with the hardest part. And if it fails, like, it's their job that's on the line, it's their decision. So instead of saying, oh, here's the tool, good luck with it, you gotta be there. You gotta help them create value and help the organization deliver a better customer experience with the tool.
Yeah, and that's the tricky part, because like, if you're any sort of product you're building, if you're trying to, I would say like any successful product that comes out, that's like a really big deal. You're changing some sort of user behavior, you're trying to make them do something different. It's not, you're not optimizing like 10% of their clicks or something like that. And I don't know, it's the trick. Like, unless you can get them to actually shift behaviors and stuff like that and try those new things instead of just trying the tool, then they just blame the tool and say, oh, the tool doesn't work as well. And it's like, well, you're not using it in the right way, which is like kind of the privileged programmer of talking about that sort of stuff. It's like, oh, well, it's your fault, not our fault. But I don't know, it's just a tricky balance to try and figure out, how do you get people to use your product, and how do you get people to kind of subtly change their own opinions of how the world works.
Yeah, I agree. It's sometimes people start using GitLab, but they keep using all their old ways of doing things, and yeah, they kind of complain that the tool doesn't allow for that, and it allows a bit. Like, for example, we allow you to rebase your commits to get a nicely linear history, even though it's not what Git is made to do. But look, we don't want to try to be, if our customers want it, we'll build it. It's just not where the tool is steering you towards. You want to kind of nudge people in the good direction, but it's not just the person using GitLab, it's also the rest of the organization that has to come along. And then right now in San Francisco, there's Dreamforce, and there's over 100,000 people descending on the city. Like, that's the kind of the impact you need to have to change behavior. Like, yeah, you should use a CRM. It's better if you keep if you structure your contact with people, and you know what you did, and you know who's reaching out to them. Makes total sense. But apparently, to get people to use that, you need a way bigger platform, a platform that we currently don't have. And I think maybe nobody has. Maybe nobody in the dev tooling space is really good at that. Maybe except for Rally and Pivotal, which are very, but even maybe AWS is maybe the best example. Like AWS reInvent is probably the biggest thing where people transform the way they work from on-prem data centers to using all the services that AWS provides.
Yeah, it is kind of weird though. Like, I don't know, like the in-person thing does change things quite a bit differently than, just seeing like a README or something like that. Like, you almost want to say it shouldn't work because it's, you're spending an hour in like a talk or something, and then like, cool, you could also just sit at home for like a week, like studying documentation and stuff, and they'd still come away saying, oh, well, this isn't going to work out or something like that. So I don't know, humans are weird, like TLDR. There's definitely like a lot more people who are better at this than me, like in terms of sales and human behavior and stuff. And I don't know, it's just a really fascinating area of like, how do you, sell to people without being like scummy about it and stuff like that.
It's really hard. Well, it's. I think our team, and especially Cortland, have done a great job of that. For example, we recently changed that. We're really respectful of only using the email addresses we collect from you for really the purpose you gave it to us for. So we're not going to put you on a mailing list by default or a drip campaign, but it's not what everyone else is doing, and it hurt our lead flow and everything. And we think it's the right thing to do in the long term, but these things are kind of hard to do and to figure out.
What is this long term you're talking about? In Silicon Valley, like you got to just think about only the next week, get those metrics up, and
one goal and focus on that. But for example, one thing that was surprising to me, large companies, like really more than 5,000 potential users for us, they don't reach out. They never reach out. They are used that every vendor in the space comes to them. They never have to get in touch themselves. So you really have to reach out and send them emails. We almost close no deals by them reaching out. Well, in like the SMB space, small, medium businesses, they use GitLab, they're happy with it, and they reach out. But imagine that you work at a large company, you're so inundated with inbound requests, you never even bother to go out yourself because you assume that all the good companies will reach out anyway. And that's valid, and that's what we're doing too. And we learned that lesson that we have to be proactive there.
Yeah.
Bring it a bit back to complete DevOps. The whole ops space seems very fragmented, and we're trying to do better there. But for example, we're trying to do autolog, where when you deploy an app, you get the logs as well. And we thought about how to do that, and we're thinking about it in a decentralized way. So one application can link to just one log collector, just like Prometheus. With every application or service you deploy, you get its own monitoring instance. And then with kind of Fluentd or things like that, you can stream things up that are interesting. I haven't seen that design a lot in the rest of the industry. I wonder what your opinions are.
What was that last little bit? You cut out a little bit.
Yeah, I wonder what you think. Logging, I always kind of viewed it as something that would be centralized in a company, just like monitoring. You'd have this big farm of machines, and for logging, a big Elk stack, big Elasticsearch cluster. And then Prometheus showed us another way, namely monitoring. You wanted to deploy it per service, because when do you need monitoring most? When half of your stuff is down, like then you really need it. Then you don't want this centralized monitoring thing to be down at the same time. And that was, it took me a while before I accepted that would be a thing. And but now that it is, I think it's kind of interesting and we're thinking about doing the same thing for logging, but by default, the logging will happen on a service, on an application basis, not this big centralized Elasticsearch farm.
Yeah, I mean, I'm less versed on like the infrastructure side of things than you are, but it's a tough problem in terms of like trying to figure out like the balance between, I don't know, ease of use versus efficiency and resiliency and stuff like that. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't mucked around with logging in the last many years, I guess, like that. So I don't know even what like the best standard practices and stuff like that is for them.
How come? Like that's interesting. Like why you develop? You're doing a new startup. You're building it yourself. Why haven't you done logging, or do you use the SaaS servers or something like that?
Yeah, I mean,
something like that.
It's like one of those funny things. So like I'm pre-launch startup. So it turns out there's a lot of things that are a lot easier when you have, I think I have 8 users right now. I can just go down and it doesn't really matter. And logging is something that's kind of lumped in the bucket of like, well, it's not that big of a deal until it becomes that big of a deal. And in which case you wish you just sort of had stuff that you can backtrack to from forever. But then, it implies that you had set that up and had the foresight to, really tackle that ages ago when you didn't have the time and resources to do it back then. So logging, I don't know. I just kind of feel like it's lumped into something that I just wish there were just better solutions automatically for me to not have to worry about it until I really have to worry about it. Or, ideally, I make a lot of money and then I can hire a good team to really track this down. But from like a small, I'm a single person startup right now. It's a tricky problem to try and justify development hours to really figure this out at such an early stage. If that makes sense.
Yeah. You're a single person startup now. What do you do first? Like, what are the things you have in place? What are the things like you're going to do soon? And what are the things you're not focused on? Like, for example, SCM already using it, CI looking into it, but like vulnerability management, that's out in the future.
Yeah, it's a fairly good, I have like CI set up, but like, again, it's kind of the end of the day. I'm like, well, do I work on this feature that will, presumably bring in money, or do I, write a bunch of tests for the next day or two? And a lot of this sort of stuff falls by the wayside. And I think for good reason, because the whole idea of building a company is, it's a process, and you sort of start tacking on these things as you have more time, as you have more resources to spend on them, and grow the company that way. So. Yeah, I mean, it's mostly a matter of like right now, a big balance between like 80% of my focus is on like, how do I build out features and, build out infrastructure to support those features. And then the remaining 10 to 30% of my time is like, how do I build a good ecosystem, even though it will be, woefully underserved right now, but like, how do I put myself in these guidelines to where in the future, I can start building out some stuff once I have more time to devote to that. But it gets the balance definitely shifts as you become a more mature development organization. But until then, it's tricky. Like, and the balance is always there, even as like a GitLab. You're still balancing between how do we push forward the product as much as possible, but still slow down and make sure we're not like completely running off the rails 6 months from now because we're just totally heads down and, not really working on for the long term as well. So.
Yep, no, I totally agree. And there's always this, you take on business debt, you take on you spend money every month, and then it makes sense to also take on some tech debt. And especially in the beginning where you don't have a lot of features and the features you have kind of changed a lot. It doesn't make sense to have a lot of tests for regression purposes because, look, there's not that much functionality. And if you build a lot of tests, you'd have to change those tests along with the rest of the product. So kind of double work. And then the argument people used was like, yeah, but the tests also make you write better code, and it's true on one side, but they also make you write worse code on the other side, because now you're adding this complexity in order to run your tests effectively. And for GitLab, yeah, what we're doing, what we're focused on now is make sure that every functionality we make also runs well on GitLab.com. And a lot of the stuff we write, it works great locally. It works great at the scale that our 10,000, 50,000 users that our customers are using, but not with 500,000 users that GitLab.com is on. So how do we figure that out, and how do we prevent that from being deployed to 100% of our users and then running into problems? So we just started with a quality team that is going to develop guidelines for that.
What sort of process do you have in when you, like, some of your bigger customers who have it on premise, and they, obviously will face challenges because of their particular situation, wherever the case is. I'd just be kind of interested to hear how y'all have tackled that problem of obviously there's a balance between, okay, we want to fix whatever problem you're facing is today. But in a lot of cases, customers of any company are kind of the first line of defense, or they find the problems before a lot of other people, and trying to deal with the balance between, fixing the problem now, but also using that as fodder to figure out, okay, this is the bigger, longer term fixes we want to do based on this feedback that has come in. I don't know. I'm always interested in hearing different companies' approaches to how they tackle that particular thing in person.
Yeah, when we started the company, our users were having problems on-prem, and that was really hard for us to fix, because you don't have access to the logs, you don't have access to the metrics, so you can't really diagnose what's going on. So we said, okay, we want to have all the problems on our own infrastructure before we ship anything to customers. So we do a lot of release candidates on GitLab.com before the final, before the .0 patch goes out. And that's really helpful, because it allows us to detect all the performance problems and all the other problems and all the confusion, and have a very quick turnaround on that. That being said, you can look at our patch releases every month. There's about 3 of them, and they contain 10, 20, 30 different things. And if you look at our history, the impact of these things has gotten a lot smaller. We had a release years ago where all SSH cloning broke. That's not happening anymore. That, no way that can go out. So it starts to become more things that impact fewer people. This combination with that combination doesn't work, or this is kind of unclear, etc. So luckily we never shipped something yet which would impacted the data stored with our customers, and that's something we focus on. That stuff we can't have where there's an impact in that. So yeah, nothing goes to our customers before it's deployed on GitLab.com. That is a rule in the company, and we're sticking with that. And so far that's worked really well.
I imagine with the popularity of your SaaS side growing so much, you're starting to see the ratio go back down between being able to catch far more bugs with your own stuff before it goes to customers than, because I would imagine the ratio used to be kind of the opposite early on, just because you said it's
we had customers that had 30,000 users on-prem, and GitLab.com was 10,000. But now it's switched, and it's going to get way more extreme. GitLab.com is growing nicely every month, and it's outpacing our biggest customers. So we're now at 10x, but it's going to be 100 or 1,000x soon. Yeah. So that's great, and that means even less possibility for things to slip through the cracks. because like if people on GitLab.com have a problem, it's really easy. They just file a ticket, send us the URL. We're able to replicate it quickly and turn it around. And what we need to do is go from where we're now deploying releases on GitLab.com. We want to go to continuous delivery. We're preaching that, but we're not practicing it. Also because we have this problem where we have to bundle all our code in a package, an omnibus package, to ship it out. We want to test that package too. So we're using the omnibus package, but we're now going to switch to Helm charts and a cloud native setup.
Yeah, that's the faster you can get to incremental change and stuff. That's clearly the most ideal position to be in.
Yeah, we want to do incremental rollouts where a new feature just goes to like first on staging, then on pre-production with kind of a fake workload, and then on production, but starting at like 1%, so that when we ship something bad, the blast radius is much reduced.
Yeah.
Cool. Any things you wanna talk about, or things that stood out in the complete DevOps vision?
Yeah, there was a bunch of stuff. Hold on, let me pull it up again. I'd like to kind of know more of your thoughts on like the, you're doing a lot more in terms of, I want to call it like the analysis of the code that gets deployed.
Yeah, the code quality.
Trying to figure out like both in terms of, there's a whole slew of things from like, obviously, errors and exceptions, but also in terms of like vulnerabilities and in terms of performance and like, I don't know, I feel like I've talked to a lot of like really small companies in the last even like couple of weeks who, I don't know, really painfully ignore a lot of that stuff. And they're just kind of like, oh yeah, when do you update for vulnerabilities and stuff? And they're like, well, when it's on Hacker News or something like that, like I'll upgrade. And it's like, oh, there's so many, I don't know. That's one of the things I've talked to you about this before. It's like, that's one of the things I'm really interested in, not even just from today, but from like the next 5-year perspective of like the code that we do write. How can we make sure that it's good and accurate and safe and fast and all of that fun stuff?
Yep. Yeah, we're starting a big thing, and so Dimitri, my co-founder, our CTO, is on it, and it's our security initiative, and it means that we're going to do static application security testing, dynamic application security testing, and vulnerability management. So what's shipping right now is a static for Ruby, and it basically means if you use Auto DevOps, we're going to run Brakeman on your code base. Mm-hmm. Brakeman, you're probably familiar with. It's a Ruby gem, and it detects whether there are any known vulnerabilities in your code. Now, we're approaching this a bit different than most tools, because the natural thing is to fail the build. Like there's a vulnerability, we fail the build. You're not going to be able to send this code out. I discussed with Dimitri, and I think we want to integrate a lot of tools in it, and we're going to have some type of signal to noise ratio. Like there's not every warning is valid. So instead of failing the build, we'll treat it like code quality, where it just shows you what got worse, what got better. Now, it's different than code quality because it doesn't only move when you change your code. When you change your code, you might introduce a vulnerability because there's a new dependency or something like that. But also, code that worked like a week ago, exactly the same code can fail this week because a vulnerability was found. So I don't want to tie the enforcement to making code changes, because you might have an application that hasn't been deployed for a year or hasn't been worked on by anyone for a year that now has a problem. So I'm thinking about continuous deployment, where you say this app needs to be deployed every hour or every day. and then you rerun all the tests, and you find if there's a vulnerability now suddenly discovered. Also make sure that you can reliably deploy. So suppose you have a heartbleed and you kind of need to update all the apps in your organization. That's going to be a nightmare if half of them haven't been deployed in the last 3 months, because there's going to be stuff that's kind of half broken. So what you want to do is just keep deploying. And now with Kubernetes, we can have zero downtime, incremental deploys. There's much less risk to a deploy, and we should double down on that. So you got continuous delivery, where every commit you make can be deployed. You got continuous deployment. Every commit you make will be deployed. And then you got continuous deployment, or constant deployment, I might have called it, where a commit, the same commit can be deployed multiple times, because like if it hits that hour or that day, it's just going to deploy the same commit, but it's going to go through all the tests and all the different things. And I think that's going to be very interesting. It's also going to give you the confidence when you make a code change and you deploy it, and there's some performance metric that's off. You know it's because of the code change, not of the deployment, because the same deployment happened with different code an hour ago, and that didn't cause anything. Mm-hmm. So I think that's where we're going, and we're gonna aggregate that output of those security metrics on a higher level, where you can see on a group, like, are there any known vulnerabilities here? We're gonna focus on getting the signal to noise right, because there's a lot of security tools. We're all gonna bundle them. But we're going to give each of them like a signal to noise ratio, and then we can use aggregate data from like all the users of GitLab.com or all the users in your organization. When they saw this warning, did they say dismiss, or did they say create an issue based on this? And we can use that signal of like, is this a real thing or not, to prioritize what we show you. And we're going to show you the top 10 signal items. Another thing I'm bullish about is Graphias. It's released by Google. And what it does is it allows you to annotate containers and things like that with the security tests. And if it hasn't been tested, you can deploy it. And it's going to be enforced on Kubernetes itself. So no way you're going to deploy a container that hasn't been tested on Kubernetes. I think that's a wonderful way to do enforcement. So we're going to support that as well. And then we're now working on static analysis, but we're also going to do dynamic analysis. And that means like testing with a running app. That's going to be easy with GitLab because we got this review app. So that's a running app and we can test against that. So we're not going to take down your production environment by doing this. We can do it on the application with the code change.
Yeah, all of that stuff is just like, that's what jazzes me up the most out of like anything right now, just because, you know, a lot of things what you were talking about, like it takes a lot of time to do it manually, right? And I know that, I don't know, I want to say like you kind of need like 50 developers or like a team of like 50 or somewhere around those plus or minus 25 before you really have like the resources to, you know, do this for every single, you know, app in your stack and make sure that, you know, it's funny when you're like talking about, oh, this app hasn't been deployed in 3 to 6 months or something, like that just made me feel the fear. Cause you know, I've been in that situation when you're like, all right, I'm not really changing many dependencies, but like, I don't know what's going to happen when this gets deployed. And like that type of constant sort of just, all right, this is just deployed. You know, we can test this out, make sure that this is like a legitimately fine deployment, even though no real code changes have changed from my perspective. That's the really interesting part. And like, it's, you know, I kind of say this with a mindset towards like the smaller company because I'm a small company right now, but obviously you see these types of things across all spectrums of companies. Like, you know, your team of 12 in a company of 5,000 may also not have the correct amount of resources to make sure that you are constantly up to date on, you know, code quality and security vulnerabilities and stuff like that. So I think that's like the really interesting stuff, especially when you start talking about the, you know, crowdsourced, you know, is this like a real thing or not? Like, did most people upgrade on this? did like 90% of people upgrade this in 2 days? Then, flash like the sirens. This is probably like a really big deal. And that's the things that's like, you can't really do that if you were just a really good private project or something. Like, once you start having the ability to like actually check against your users and get like, the wisdom of the crowd and stuff like that becomes really interesting. And like people are, I don't know if AI is going to be programming all of our code for us in 20 years or something like that. But like, this is at least something that is manageable now and in the next like 5 or 10 years, that I think that's going to be a huge part. Like at the end of the day, you're just trying to get, Google resources for like, regardless of your team size. And like that stuff gets really exciting to think about.
Very, very well. Yeah, I'm thinking about exactly the same thing. I think the mission of Core OS, or the unofficial slogan, is Google infrastructure for everyone else. I think our unofficial motto might be phrased as large company DevOps for everyone else. And then thinking of Google, thinking of Netflix. And you're not going to run Spinnaker with your one-person startup, a Netflix deployment tool. But we can make it really easy to kind of get the same functionality, but integrate it into what you're already doing. You're already doing merge requests. You're already clicking in the accept button. We need nothing more. As long as we have Kubernetes on the back end, we can do that incremental rollout. We can have an assumption about what error rate is causing a problem and roll it back for you. And that's where we're going.
And like circling back to like the earlier discussion about like the ecosystem, like since you do have kind of hooks into different aspects of the stack, whether it's sort of, through an integration or just through like the platform. Alexa is talking to me. I did not talk to you, Alexa. Alexa, shut up. This is amazing. This is what technology is nowadays. That totally blew what I was talking about. What was I talking about?
I think what I think is that because we're doing so much with GitLab, you get these emergent benefits because you can hook up things that weren't hooked up before. And I think a great example is review apps. Review apps, super useful, very hard to set up unless you're already using Heroku or something. But with GitLab, you get them out of the box with Auto DevOps. You just push your code base to GitLab. We figure it out. We give you a review app for every code change you make. You get like this dedicated staging environment that will be there for as long as the merge request is ongoing. Super useful and things that you only get in GitLab. And we're going to probably put a few links in the comments, and one of them will be a link to constant deployment, issue 3363 on the EE issue tracker. There's on our direction page, there's emergent benefits of a single application. I think that's interesting. And I'm going to paste it here in the chat for you now. And there's also a lot of things that we can use machine learning and AI for. We're not doing major work there right now. We think there's still a lot of work to do just to complete the vision. But we're already thinking about signal to noise, recommendation engines, smart behavior, code quality, code navigation. Those are things where we can use AI to make it better.
Yeah, it's just like the whole, kind of what I was mentioning earlier was like we've had, take a security aspects. We've had vulnerability scanners for ages, but if you can, say, hey, this is like a security problem, I want to spin up like a review app for you. If you can start plugging that into all monitoring sort of stuff, like it's just, it just reduces a lot of the risk for you without having to worry about, just not have to worry less. And like, that's, I don't know. I'm just stoked. I just have enough worries in my life that I don't have to worry about like some small patch change that may or may not take down the site,
Yep. And it's amazing how siloed everything is. Like the current security tools, they're all like being run outside of the developer space, because every time they try to integrate the security tools, the developers got annoyed. Their build was broken again because of some false flag. So they won't allow it. So instead, you have this separate security department, and all they do is send issues to the developers who then have to fix it. And then you run monitoring on your machines to see whether it's already fixed, and if not, you tell them. Like, it's the same thing as with deployments. The machine, GitLab should take care of this. So right now, everyone in the world is babysitting their deployments. Like you deploy an app, you're going to sit and watch the metrics and outputs change, whether it's going okay or not, if it's important. And that's something that GitLab should do for you. And if it's way worse, it's just going to roll back, and you're going to have all the time in the world to see what went wrong and how to fix it. So it's just, there's a lot of automation you can do, but it's taking us it's going to take us 1.5 years to build all that into GitLab. So if you don't have 100 developers dedicated to building this, you're never going to get there. So that's what the advantage is. It's 100,000 organizations using GitLab, contributing to it. Because even with our 100 developers, we're just going to build the beginning steps, and it still has to be filled out by all the open source contributions.
Yeah. I'm stoked to see how it turns out.
Thanks, man. We're going to keep you posted. Do you have anything else you wanted to discuss, or shall we conclude on this? I
think that's pretty good for now.
Cool. Well, thank you very much. If you're viewing, thanks for watching. And Zach, I'd love to do this again to show you how it's turning out.
Definitely. I'm into it.
Cool. See ya.
See ya.